Hi everyone. Today I have invited Florian Kroll to come and sit with me, and we are speaking within the topic of Shakti, life force, Kundalini, many names for one thing. So the reason why we are sitting like this, we've just each placed a cushion behind our tailbone, and you reflected that it's basic meditation position and optimal for moving our life for Shakti energy. Let's start by flow. When you were on your way here, you sent me a message saying, I'm on my way. And I answered you by sending a dragon.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because you are dancing dragon. And that is in that capacity that I've invited you to come and talk with me. So would you mind just giving like a little introduction of what your field of expertise is?
Yeah, and maybe I'll speak also to the dragon thing because it relates to that. So partly the name derives from an experience that I had. It was facilitated by trance in a dance environment. And I'm not going to tell the whole story of it, but long story short, in this trance experience, I encountered a dragon, and the usual kind of mythological thing is that, a warrior goes and faces a dragon and slays it in order to liberate the maiden who's been cruelly, kept locked up somewhere by this evil creature. And I was kind of on that track, but then in the middle of the journey, I had the sense that this is not the right approach. And instead of, pulling out my sword and slaying the dragon, I actually took my sword out and kneeled in front of the dragon and offered the dragon this sword. And
the sword?
The sword itself. Okay. And the dragon took it and it accepted it as a gift. And essentially what the dragon was saying to me was that I was actually one of them. I'm their kin. And felt like, so this dragon was like bluish, like covered by lapis or turquoise kind of scales, incredibly wise, incredibly benevolent, kind, even playful in a way, and very wise, very knowledgeable. And he actually gave this thing back to me. And it felt like as I took it on and in the experience of the dream, like girding it, putting it in my belt, it felt like it became part of me, part of my energy body. And so that experience to me also then, triggered certain kinds of spontaneous body movements. I think we'll speak about that perhaps a little bit later, which also spoke to me that there was a big energetic charge and something deep which had happened at that moment. And after that, the dragon invited me to ride on his shoulders. And he flew up into the skies, and there was this experience of going through these amazing pirouettes and loop-the-loops amongst the clouds, flying in the skies.
Makes me think of Avatar. With those
yes, it had that kind
through
of
their
feeling.
Spines.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
It was really a very beautiful experience, very exhilarating, and very emotionally touching as well. And so that was where I took that name from, Dancing Dragon. And so for me, I've held a long fascination with dragons because of the kind of mythology of it. I'm raised with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and things like that, and all the tales of chivalry and dragons was part of my kind of cultural milieu. But it's also played a big role in the kind of Oriental spaces that I immersed myself in through the martial arts background. And so in many of these cultures, the dragon represents the kind of primal, creative life force energy of the planet, of the earth, kind of elemental energy. And that's in a way what I feel connected to and what I invoke that name. And so one of the ways in which it connects to the Oriental thing is that when I was a youngster, I did a lot of reading around the myths of the samurai, and I remember coming across a book that spoke about the way in which the samurai would cultivate life force energy in order to be better warriors, but also as part of a kind of a spiritual cultivation practice. And so at that time, I was like fascinated by this. First time I read about the Dantian and about Qi, meridians, and I was like, wow, I need to know about this. I want to learn about it. And so I formed an intention and a desire to learn. And I even sent an email, sorry, not an email, those days were actually handwritten letters to a local Chinese doctor saying, I'd like you to teach me this stuff. It didn't happen. I never got a response. But in a way, my life path has followed that trajectory of exploring that interest since I was maybe 14 or something. And so to me, the dragon imagery also relates to the way in which this energy seems to move in our bodies. And it is the same kind of thing. It's deep, it's primal, it's ancient, it's energy of the earth, but it dances in the sky as well. And so there's an interesting connection there with the notion of sky dancer, which is what Dakin stands for. So in a way, Dakini and dragon are not so far apart. And that's a part of the energy also that I'm interested in and that I open myself to in that space. So,
yeah,
a little bit of backstory.
Yeah, thank you. And our connection has really been around this energy and speaking about the energy and also moving the energy freely in each other's company. Like, for instance, on the dance floor, we were dancing last week, and after the dance, we were both like, because our bodies were like, ooh, light. Oh my word. And the other people don't realize what bliss we're in.
Yes.
And we're not even touching each other. And so what I really value in our friendship is our mutual flow and connection with this life force energy. And you've been an incredible anchor for me in all of this, and I thank you so deeply for it. Because your awakening was earlier, and you've been working with this energy and moving it through your body on a daily basis, and also teaching, and continuously also reading and anchoring everything in the traditional texts. So I really appreciate your literary knowledge of what we're actually talking about. We're not just grabbing this off the sky. But what happened with me is I just literally grabbed it off the sky. Or it was by grace that it came into my body. I wasn't even looking for it. I wasn't doing research on it, nothing. And I remember we were at a festival shortly after my awakening. We were talking about something that sounded like truth or something good. And my body was like, and you said to me, is your body shaking? Like, oh, I feel truth. And that was the first time I realized this is something, because I'd started having this awakening. I was like, I didn't know what it was. I felt very alone. And for the first time, it was recognized as this is something.
Yeah. I think that's often the case when it first begins happening to us, that we experience these kind of spontaneous energy movements in the body. That we think like, wow, this is weird. I don't have any frame of reference for this. And none of my teachers have told me about this. And, you know, from a Western medical perspective, immediately we're thinking like, oh shit, there's something wrong with me. And I've actually had that, people commenting like, I thought maybe you've got like early onset Parkinson's or something like that. And actually, when this started happening with me, let's say maybe 15 years ago, it was similar, that I was kind of a little bit puzzled by it. And at the same time, I also, I mean, like you said, it was by grace, right? I mean, I'd spent years doing other stuff, and it just happened. It started happening. For me, it started happening gradually, that this energy began moving. And so it was first little twitches and jolts, and it was just by the opening and creating space around it and allowing it that then the movements became bigger and more powerful. But it was also at a time in my life when I was really beginning to deepen a lot of my Taoist practices, Tao Yin Qigong practices that I'd learned from a teacher called Max Weyer. And so the consistent practice of these things and getting into a state of what the Taoists call Wu Wei, it's that kind of expansive emptiness and space. That is what allows that energy to really move. As soon as we kind of contract around something or try and make it happen in a particular way, it feels like it squashes it. But having language for it is really important, and having frameworks for it is really important, which is why I've been studying this for such a long period of time, to try and make sense of these things. And, you know, what I also found is that whenever something like this happens that feels meaningful and deep, and I formulate a question or a curiosity, almost like life conspires to provide me with leads and ways of making sense of it. And so
it's like when the student is ready, the master appears, the teacher appears.
Yes. Exactly. And the interesting thing there is that, and this is from the Tibetan tradition, they also, you know, they hold this notion of the guru principle very high. And I've often felt a bit of an imposter syndrome about it, because I don't have a living teacher that is, you know, directly like instructing me. There's many living teachers that I follow in different ways. But one of the people that I do follow in this way, a guy called Ben, actually pointed out to me that in the Tibetan tradition, they recognize 3 different kinds of teachers. So the one being the living teacher, the other one being the guru principle itself, the teacher within, but the other also what they call the black teacher. And black because of the way that books get blackened by people's hands, so that the teachers itself becomes the scripture. And that's a legitimate way also of receiving teachings in a way. And so, in fact, we need to triangulate between those. We need to orient ourselves by living people, examples who've maybe walked a bit further or explored an area that we haven't explored, but then also orient ourselves by the inner guru principle, which is our inner knowing and the understanding that we carry a deep wisdom, the same kind of consciousness that seeks understanding, that permeates everything, really. And then the scriptures of what other teachers centuries ago have written about these things in order to make sense of them, interpret them, and convey their knowledge to others. And so I found a really amazing book. I was walking through, you know, exclusive books or something like that. And for the first time ever, and the last time ever, I saw this book called The Shaking Medicine. Which, like, oh, okay.
That resonated.
It resonated, yeah. It was just at that time when I was starting to experience those tremors. So there it was, a whole book.
A whole book, like, oh.
And it was cataloging, like, it was written by an anthropologist who had investigated many different cultures where this tremoring is known and understood. And what he actually shows is that it's common throughout Europe, Native American cultures, the shamanic cultures of Siberia and Mongolia, in Africa, in the Caribbean, wherever you look, wherever there is ecstatic movement and a direct mystical experience of the divine, there is this thing that they call the mysterium tremendum, the tremoring mystery. And that is what I felt, you know, wow, this is what we're connecting with. Yeah.
So, so thank you so much for saying that. And I deliberately connected with the sensation as you spoke about it, because I feel often we speak about things and we don't know what it looks like. So I so hear what you are saying. And I value that input. That's new for me, that one can follow all 3 paths. The one of self-exploration, the raw path, which I'm very much on. Community, where we can support one another, because we all have different pieces of the puzzle and different talents, as well as the scholarly, the historical wisdom that we can tap into. So thank you so much for bringing those 3 options. And I feel my particular gift is, because I'm a dancer and a performance artist and a bit of an exhibitionist, is really the expression of what it looks like, you know. And I'm the reason why I do so many YouTube videos and I often dance on the video. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of the scripture and the talk and the description, but we seldom see it actually moving in action. And I believe that my particular voice is arriving just in person with the connection. And then often people will look at that like we were just shaking. And someone might look at it and go, oh, good, but that's what I've been feeling in my body. Because a lot of us who start waking up feel alone, like I did in the beginning, like you did. I'm like, what is this? And I'm seeing more and more people that are I'm calling it waking up
Yeah.
to this flow of life force. Yes.
Mm.
I also find that it is teaching me from the inside.
Yeah.
So I just have a heart for so many of us that are starting to wake up, that are starting to feel these shakes in our body, and we don't know what it is, and therefore we shut it down. I'm seeing so many people that are so connected, that are so in their awakening process, and then they leave because they're the one in the workshop going, woo, woo, and everyone looks at you weird, and you don't know what to do with it. It's almost like these people have done such work. Same with me. I also actually did a lot of work before the awakening happened, not realizing where it's leading. But people do the work. They do the work. They're seekers. They're seekers. They're seekers. Then suddenly you find. Because all of this is actually pointing towards this connection with the life force, the meditation, the yoga, the art, the music. So just through my own experience, I am experiencing this energy as through my own explorations and meditations as our as collective awakening to the new dimension of being through our bodies. It's the same what Jesus talked about. It's the same what Buddha talked about. But now see, I grab these teachers' names and I just go, and he said God is inside your body. I'm like, that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like Christ consciousness. This is it. Then I see the whole world like bright and beautiful when I connect to this energy. And I'm going, what the what? This is the new earth. He was right. It comes through our bodies. So that's my only reference point. And then I did some Buddhist meditation, and it also makes sense with what the Buddha says of like the Buddha is all about you being the Buddha, you realizing you are the divine being. So all my explorations have been very like simply physical, experiential, and you have been so great in highlighting those texts that actually support what is happening on a very raw level with me. Like, my body is very activated. I had a session before we started. I was still like, ooh.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, just on that last point, I mean, for me, what's changed over time is that I have more deliberate choice in whether or not I allow myself to move with it. Initially, it was just come and it would just rattle me, and it was very powerful. Nowadays, it's a question of whether I choose to open myself to it or not in a particular context. So, and I think that's part of what happens with time. It's like that we have an initial experience of awakening to this energy and allowing it to move, and it becomes very blissful. But then there's a whole process of like, oh shit, what am I going to do with this? What does it mean? How can I work with this? Because I think if we're alive, we carry this energy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. And the other thing is that this is fundamentally if we take it seriously, what a lot of these teachings say, this is the life force. In other words, it is the creative intelligence that manifests itself. It's the divine desire to be and to experience and to know, which manifests itself in all the myriad different phenomena that we can experience. And it's the same energy that moves through everything that's alive and not alive. A rock, a stone, a mountain, the ocean. What we consider alive is a very like arbitrary kind of delineation. And actually, sensitivity to this energy shows that everything that we could possibly experience is alive and is totally permeated by this energy, is in fact this energy in different degrees of solidity or softness or fluidity. So for me, that was a big important insight, where it was almost as if many different lines of teaching kind of converged. The kind of animistic shamanic perspective, which sees the entire cosmos as being filled with soul and life and energy, somehow meeting with some of the classical tantric understandings, which see this energy, which they call Shakti, as the deity, the goddess herself, manifesting in many different forms to experience themselves from many different perspectives. So for me, that's a real big mindfuck, is to see how from so many different cultural traditions, the same fundamental insights seem to be arising and emerging, and also the same basic practices. Like you mentioned, how you came to this mostly through dance and through theater and through voice, right? From a very kind of Western performance arts background. And for me, it was similar. For me, it was just I came to it through the martial arts. Cultivation in the martial arts, also very deeply embodied, strong awareness of breath, cultivation of the voice, cultivation of presence. And so there are many different ways that we can come at it. It doesn't have to follow a particular tradition. But I think what's important is that once the energy is moving, we often then, that's when we lack the map and the roadmap of how to move with it.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's valuable that you say a lot of people, their first awakening is a bit overwhelming. And so it goes with body movements, shakes and things, and experiences of like a bliss state. And it's a bit too much for the nervous system, because it's like you're brand new born. Just seeing so much bliss and feeling so much bliss, and it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And some people get it slow.
Yes.
Some people it just trickles in. And for me, the trick is also, okay, fine, there was one stage where in our private space we move it, in the dance we move it, in lovemaking we move it, But then, okay, so what's the purpose? And then to start trying activating it in public and out,
Yes.
when I'm walking on the beach, when I'm at the supermarket. And in the beginning, I would be so clumsy, and I would just have these jolts in public,
Yes.
or whoop, or sounds,
Yes.
oh no, I'm a word, hold yourself down, sister. The moment I connect to my body, it's like, But then the practice became of how can I hold that in still presence? In still presence, still move, like a flame up my spine. While I'm standing in the supermarket, not shaking, feeling really fantastic. And then often I find doing, we do the meditation, we do the practice, we do the but when we start integrating this into life, I'm starting to feel, and I'm quite new in it, but trying to bring it into my walking and talking is transforming stuff, which is so weird.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Very
it's like
powerful.
synchronicities just come, and not like you expected. You can't use this energy. It's so, how can you use God? I'm going to use God to do this. You just align to it.
Well, that's an interesting thing there, because, and this is more from the Tantric perspective. In India, Tantra is actually considered really dodgy in many contexts. It's seen as kind of a black magic. And traditionally also, Tantra is said to have three different purposes. One is awakening, the other one is empowerment, and the third is liberation. So the awakening bit is easy. Most of us can get there very quickly for this energy to come big and moving. But then what do you do with it? What is the purpose of it? So the empowerment, which they also call pleasure, bhoga, is about being able to get the things that bring pleasure and that bring, empowerment, to get the stuff that you actually want, to be able to manifest your desires, right? And the liberation thing goes beyond that, to say, any desire that we can formulate in one way or another is limited in a way by our own conditioning. And
our ego mind. If you say, I want that, really
Precisely.
comes from a sense of lack.
Exactly. And there's already a bit of a distortion there in the desire. So if the desire is completely pure and free and spontaneous, then generally what it manifests will also be pretty benevolent. But if it's still coming through our conditioning, then that desire is likely to manifest things that's going to rebound on us in one way or another. And so, again, from our Western context, we have some kind of mythological template for this. For me, it was the Star Wars trilogy with Darth Vader, use the Force versus, the dark side.
I'm like, geez, these people are talking about the Force.
Exactly.
I often say to people, may the Force be with you. And I know exactly what I mean.
Exactly. But that's exactly what's happening.
They were actually talking about the Force.
And Darth Vader was one who had cultivated the Force with great capacity, but was deeply into his own suffering. So there is that risk, right? Where it can either become a path to liberation or a path of sorcery, which can inflict more chaos and more harm to others. And so that's, for me, interesting, where this notion of bodhicitta comes in. So you mentioned the Buddha earlier on, and bodhicitta literally means the heart or the mind of the Buddha, which is really compassionate bliss. So if we cultivate that, and that's really the sensation that we feel when we're going into the shaking, it's the Buddha mind.
Pureness without a thought.
Yes. There's no
The
thought, no
essence.
concept, but it's very blissful.
Yes.
And very powerful as well.
Yes. So that is how I understand and what I've experienced with manifesting. So now they teach you on YouTube, manifest, put your goal. So I've tried that, and it only worked with one thing, getting a computer. Glad that worked. Anyway, but the other things, it didn't work, and I'm like, geez, but I'm moving this energy, and surely I should be able to manifest. Like, what am I doing wrong? But what I have found is when I simply go and surrender, and I go into a space, specifically nature is very powerful for me. I just go into a body meditation in nature, and I activate the force through my body, which is basically a sensation of bliss. I just sit there in bliss in nature, and just like, oh, word, the sky is so blue. Thank you. Thank you. Glory be for this life, and just sit there in like absolute no intention, no method, no doing, but just in like then somehow things manifest, and often much better than I thought. But it's not like a magic potion that you throw. It's a deep humility. Like you can't use it. You can't use it. We're only aligned to this divinity, which is so much greater than ourselves. It's knowledge. It's so much greater than ourselves, and we have this wonderful privilege of, instead of praying for God out there, to go, I align with God. I align with the divinity. I align with pure consciousness. I am just going on in this river of like, just pure presence, God within us, like Jesus said. Then somehow it aligns us, but not always in a way that we think we should. Sometimes there's even some pain involved because we have to let go of stuff or whatever.
Well, very often we manifest our delusions first, and that can be quite painful.
Things that you need to get rid of, that you need to shed. It's quite magical. I'm just learning. I'm humbled.
Well, that's the thing, really. This notion of manifesting is one of my kind of pet peeves, actually. It's like very narrow, entitled, actually, New Age thinking. And for me, one of the reasons why I'm very critical about it is because if we look at all the suffering in the world, this logic of just simply being able to manifest something if you only believe strong enough, the flip side of it implies that all of the millions that are suffering are just responsible for it themselves.
And they're not good enough, they're not manifesting well enough. What's wrong with them?
Exactly. So it actually is a way of dodging our collective responsibility for the collective suffering of everyone. And I'm actually reading a very interesting book at the moment by an American author. Can't remember her name. It doesn't really matter right now. But the book is called Smile or Die. And it really speaks about this whole thing, which is actually part of an American cultural belief system around fundamental optimism and just needing to smile properly, being positive, and then you'll manifest the right thing. But if it's coming from that place of selfishness, of entitlement, of egoic desire, it's going to backfire, and it actually leads to neglecting our responsibility for solidarity, which we hold as human beings for all living beings. And that's where I find, for me, like the importance of Buddhist Tantra for me lies very much in that, in this notion of compassion. Is that and this is a particular development of Buddhism, that's the second wave of Buddhism, Mahayana, which recognizes that if we are all the same fundamental consciousness and awareness, and as long as any single conscious sentient being is suffering, there is suffering in the field. And so we bear a collective responsibility of solidarity, of contributing towards the alleviation of suffering of all beings. And so anyone who makes use of this energy in a way that is self-serving or that doesn't take that level of compassion seriously is actually just compounding the suffering and causing more harm. And that's really where that angle of, is is it enlightened and compassionate action, or is it more in the direction of sorcery and the dark side of the force? And of course, it's not just dark and light. There's a lot of shades and colors in between. But I think it's really important to bear that in mind. It's that this thing of compassion and solidarity and care is at the heart of anything that is to do with Tantra, unless you want it to backfire on you and hurt you and others down the line. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing that you brought up, this thing of manifesting, because I think it's much abused.
Yeah. So from the little experience that I had with Buddhist meditation, that meditating into the sensations in the body, no thinking, just feeling, but then accompanied with that was this sense of non-attachment and equanimity. So not this is good and that is bad. So I want this because it's good, and I don't want that because that's bad. So what we understand in that desire, craving, is an attachment, and that attachment causes suffering. So even just for me as myself, as a person, as part of the collective, I'm exuding more suffering because of what I'm craving. I'm contributing to that sense of field.
Yeah.
But when I am able to, through meditation and deep equanimity, just become conscious of the clear flow of energy, then it's that liberation from the suffering. And apparently, according to the Buddhist teaching that I understand, that this suffering, this attachment, I want this, I crave that, I want to use that, keeps making us want to be reincarnated as a soul, because I haven't sorted out my Ferrari yet. Until you let it go, and then you stop being incarnated, then you're like, oh, liberated. Since you're awakened.
Yeah, and I think that there's an interesting thing there also, where as Westerners, because we come from a very puritanical Protestant background, it's very easy for us to again get into the thing of demonizing desire or demonizing any of these strong emotions, aversion or attachment. And so where I found the Tantric Buddhism, which is a later development that builds on this kind of compassionate ethos of Mahayana, I found that very interesting, is that what they're saying is like, don't try and avoid desire. Don't try and avoid aversion. Don't try and avoid pride or shame. These are natural parts of who we are as human beings. Those are naturally arising. What is problematic is the attachment to that feeling.
Or maybe the judgment also of
judgment
it. Of like, this is good, that is bad, I must have this, not that.
Exactly. But at that moment, you're engaging with it, and you're taking a position in relation to it, and you're othering it, and you're giving it more energy. And so the Tantric approach is to say, well, this is natural. We all feel these things. They can be poisonous if we indulge in them to excess, but if we are smart and we use them in a almost like a homeopathic way to achieve a higher outcome, they can actually be beneficial. So that's the Tantric Buddhist thing, is to say, work with desire, work with anger. Don't try and push it away, and don't pretend it's necessarily evil in its own right. It's not. It's just naturally arising and spontaneous, as anything is. If you allow it to move, all that remains is blissful awareness. But as soon as you hold onto it and concretize a position for or against it, want to hold it or push it away, then it becomes more solid than it needs to be.
So in a way, we'll be identifying with it too much, and rather to look at one's desire for instance, that car or something, I'm observing that I'm desiring this car, and I have some compassion for myself for desiring it, and I'm just recognizing it and not judging it as bad or evil. And then even the charge of desiring that car then will start softening. And maybe it takes time.
For sure. But the point also is that you can use this, it's energy. It's emotional, mental energy. And by trying to resist it, we're having to add energy to it to keep it bottled up, to push it away, or to claw it closer to us. Whereas if we just allow it to be, we can liberate that energy and use it as almost like jet fuel for our own liberation and awakening. And so the flip side of this, and where it relates to the Kundalini energy, is that these are all different flavors of Shakti Kundalini energy, and that we can actually leverage that energy and transmute it and release the things that we're carrying, because a lot of these things we cycle around them because of the traces of past experience, what they would call samskaras, which are kind of concretized experiences of the past that we haven't fully let go of, that we haven't fully digested and integrated. They stuck to us. And part of what I'm beginning to understand, and I may be wrong here, but that these things have almost like an energetic body that attaches itself to our energy body. And that many of these energy movements that we experience, part of what seems to be happening is that if we allow it, if we create space around it, that samskara has a chance to shift and to move and to transmute, and releases that energy, which then becomes available to us in our energy bodies to become more conscious, more loving, more compassionate, more powerful.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to try to repeat what you just said, because you just said so many highly profound things. Okay, so our energy, our cravings, or our life experiences, traumas, whatever, goes and sits in the physical body as a memory, and become, I can even link it to Carl Jung, that says it becomes your unconscious drive or whatever. It's always sitting there. And by activating this flow of energy through the body, which in a simple way would be just becoming aware of sensations through the body or whatever, and without attaching us to any story, we might feel emotions actually just moving through. And I know, I mean, if you touch different parts of your body, you literally feel different emotions, you know, as you, and and just to allow those to be felt without going, oh, what was that story? What did I just release there? You don't have to go and nitpick what it was. It's like, oh, it's moving through, and this grace of this pure, sometimes see it as light, sensation comes and purifies that space again with one's connection to the divine nothingness. I want to say divine nothingness, clarity. You know, that's not the story or anything. So with healing, I'm like, wait, I'm sorry, like healing her. It's like, why do you want to heal stuff? Why do you want to heal? Like with healing, I'm also always like, let go. Like we don't have to go and deal with the issue often. We just go, just connect to this light, just connect to the clear light. It's like you're having an operation. Just allow the operation to happen. It's going to do it by itself. Connect to the light, it will heal you. Don't go and mess with the mess.
Yeah, one doesn't need to have to know exactly what's going on everywhere. This energy has its own intelligence to a large degree. Our practices that we can do to cultivate our kind of inner map and carve out grooves through which the energy can travel more effectively. But essentially, once you open yourself up to this bliss and the shaking, what happens over time, it seems, is that these concretized past traumas and the kind of emotional flavor of it, the craving, the aversion, the shame, the pride, whatever it is, those gradually liberate and dissolve and release energy that then becomes available to us. There is a flip side to this where it can backfire a little bit. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of these practices are generally taught in the context of a teacher-student relationship, and in a space where a student is, at least has a certain degree of guidance and is taught certain techniques to transform these energies. And the reason is that initially it feels to me like some of what happens with this energy is when it begins to move, it begins to animate those concretized samskaras, and that they sometimes become bigger than what they need to be and start acting out and hijacking our experience.
And do you mean there, like I would say, I mean, when I work with a client, I was working with a client now, when we move the energy through and we get to a certain space, like the heart space, and the person just wants to go into a deep sobbing, you know, that like, that experience. Is that what you mean when we like dive into that, deep feeling emotion?
Sometimes maybe, but I think it's more the thing of, like, we construct our sense of identity around past experience and stories that we tell around them. And so I think what often happens is that when this energy really begins to move, that those stories become bigger and the emotions attached to them become bigger.
Okay.
And they then start driving our behavior and our sense of identity. And then we act out and we cause more cuck for ourselves. And so really valuable in many of these things is to learn the energetic processes of actually releasing that and not trying to attach identity or stories to the energy of it, or to digest it and release the energy internally and use it. So those are two very different approaches. The one is more of a kind of purging and clearing out, and the other one is more of a digesting, combusting, and then utilizing that energy to then drive your energy body really. And the Tibetans speak of the energy body almost like a magical machine, of composed of spinning wheels and so on. And so that's what a lot of the practices there do, is actually to sense where in the body are these stuck stories and emotions, and then suck them in to the root, to the base, almost like a furnace. And that's usually just beneath the belly. And then holding them there and allowing that energy to transform and digest, almost like a flame that burns off something that's impure, and then releases it upwards into the crown, and then cascading down into feelings of bliss and clarity and openness.
So transforming it, transmuting it, so transmuting the energy. What I usually see when I work with a client, for instance, and if they're starting to respond and their bodies are moving, I perceive, not with my eyes, just with feeling, I perceive streams of golden light and balls also, almost like these balls of light going through these streams and bouncing around inside the person. And I even see like you can pull energy like that, and you can pull it like that, and you can just move it, like very playful really. You can twirl it around and then sometimes exit it out an elbow and exit it out a foot, and the person's like, out the foot. But all of them almost carry like an emotional, archetypal, healing, tribal kind of recalibrating. It's like the body's recalibrating, and these lights are going on, and they're sort of shaking their way into the body and releasing where there's tension, and releasing where something's held, and just opening those streams, but in a very playful way. It's not such a big deal, like you're going to awaken, lightning's going to strike through you, you're going to integrate all your chakras in one go. We don't have to do everything in one go. We play. We play with, you've mentioned the word nadis. You awaken all these nadis as they're ready. Yeah,
totally. So there's a bunch of things that what you were saying now has sparked off for me. The one is the connection to the shamanic side of things, and what you've described there in terms of exiting things through the joints, right?
Yes.
Classical.
Yes.
Right? The joints are the places where these nadis get closest to the surface.
Really?
So those are the areas where you would probably want to let things move and exit. And then one of the oldest cultures that's cultivated this experience of working with life force energy is the culture of the bush people, the Khoi and the sun, particularly the sun. When they do their trance dances, they start shaking and tremoring. And what they will classically do is that they will pull energy, they'll pull sickness out of people and release it. Release it into the sky, or spit it into the ground, or into a fire, or something like that.
And you'll see the person's body responding to it. Yes.
And they'll sometimes also use their own body in close proximity to another dancer. And very often it's a more experienced dancer that'll get very close to someone who's less experienced, in order to allow them to ride, in a way, riding the slipstream of the energy current that the experienced dancer has. And as a result, switching on their energy body, helping them release stuff. So, I mean, what you just described as part of your direct experience of working with clients, again, has a lot of well-documented precedents in the ethnographic research around trance healing. But also if you look at traditional Chinese medicine, they'll use similar approaches as well, that they'll release places where they say that the chi is being blocked and it's stagnant and it's too much in a particular place. You need to release it so it doesn't cause cuck there. And you open up that blockage very gradually. You can't force things through. So there's very specific and quite sophisticated ways of working with that, and the Chinese have developed about 4,000 or 5,000 years of written history of working with this stuff. So they're quite sophisticated and direct, but a lot of it happens quite spontaneously and intuitively when the energy moves.
Yeah, because one can feel it, and you can also see it in the reaction of the person. They will and this is what I qualify as full body orgasms. Like, people sometimes think, oh, full body orgasms, but it's like just this sensation of like bliss shooting out your shoulders,
Yes.
and I say those are full body orgasms, but they can be like at various points. It's just this bliss going.
Yes. And that brings me to the other thing that came up for me, which is, again, the notion of bodhicitta. In the Tibetan Tantric Buddhist tradition, they speak of a thing that they call tigle, and the corresponding Sanskrit term is bindu, and what it means is a droplet of essence. And when you were speaking about those orbs moving through the body,
yes,
it's that is our vital essence, and that is also Buddha nature. It's very blissful.
Yes.
And it is something which is used in, it's not really, I suppose you can say it's used as part of some of the traditional meditation practices, is that you consciously move some of these droplets around the body in different ways, but also that you can cultivate them through meditative practice, through dance, through sexuality. These are ways of cultivating vital life force energy. And then part of the meditative yoga practices are around sending these little droplets of bliss energy in different directions along particular paths. So like what you're speaking of is, again, something that is definitely a big part of like many of the traditions and the practices that are out there.
Oh, sure. And this thing with healing and aligning, like when we start moving this through our body, then it's like it helps us to heal from the inside. And I feel we need to heal and realign on a daily basis as long as we're alive. You never arrive at the point where you go, I'm now clear. And even though I'm like so bored with people that want to do healing, I'm like, but let's do real healing. Let's do real, like, connect with the healed energy. I've heard of people that have healed broken necks.
Yes.
By simply breathing and imagining these golden balls or moving through their bodies. And so I want to bring in speaking to a client with who we move the energy, and the client was saying, in the beginning I was doing these practices and I would imagine these golden balls are moving through my body, and then I would think, am I imagining this? Is this real? Is this not? Maybe I'm only imagining it. So often in the beginning, when we do these practices, we literally feel like a bit of a fool, like the emperor's clothing or something. We're like, am I feeling it? Am I not? I don't know. So, and the tip that I would give there is, in the beginning, you literally imagine it. You can imagine it in the beginning. You just carry on the practice. And if you start imagining it, then somehow you become more tuned to it, and that's the tuning process. It then becomes sharper and sharper and sharper until eventually you, through practice, this takes practice in tuning in. You start feeling it like a little force moving through your body, like you and I do.
Yes.
And then we are even able to tune the intensity of it. We can totally make it dissipate, go away, and we're not connected to it, or we can very quickly connect to it. What a privilege. Oh my word. Fortunately, I know you well. So guys, just to say that Flo and I are sitting here rattling and rolling like so this is what we do in our private conversations. We do not do this in a coffee shop. So in a coffee shop, we try and hold on to our chairs and not go into our bliss body so much.
For sure.
But it's lovely to have these moments where we can connect with the energy, and where we can say to each other, I see you, you're waking up, your energy is flowing, like, let's cultivate it, let's teach each other, because we all have different pieces of the puzzle. You have such a big piece of the puzzle with all your physical embodiment as well as anchoring it in the ancient the text, the various texts, not only one lineage that you're following. So, thank you. I mean, we can actually talk for 5 hours more, and move so much energy. There's like such a depth of knowledge which you have here. And I've just been very grateful for being like such a dancer with the Shakti energy, so free and so just flowing and so in my feminine, and you bringing a very masculine energy to the description of it. And I think it's very useful, especially for men. They seem to desire this anchoring energy.
What I've also realized is that I'm quite strange and unusual, because on the one hand, I do have that embodiment. On the other hand, I've been cultivating myself as an intellectual for like 40 years or whatever. And so I'm realizing that I'm able to read stuff that for most people just causes them to yawn and pass out.
Exactly.
And so I'm realizing that part of maybe what I need to be doing is to read and assimilate and then share the essence of what I've understood with other people in words that are more accessible than your average PhD thesis about the Tibetan yogas or stuff like that. So I feel that's really useful for me to make peace with the fact that like the scholarly angle of delving deep into these things is a very, very small group of people, and many of those don't have an embodied experience of it either.
They're actually seeking through these texts.
That's it.
Yeah.
So where there's like a readiness and an interest, then I feel, yes, I can share and speak about these things. And, there are actually living experiences that someone has where I can say, oh, okay, I've read about this and that, and I've had this other experience myself, and maybe that's useful to you in some way, but it's not about being doctrinaire, because there are so many different lineages, there are so many different texts, and a lot of the stuff in the old texts, and Tantra actually is about texts, like the original term was about weaving of different texts. But there are so many different ones, and many of them are filled with very obscure formulas of how to do the right ritual, and like when do you pour the ghee, and what kind of incense are you going to use,
it gets very technical,
super technical, and not generally accessible for most people, myself included. So I think that's the one thing there that I feel like there's something that I'm called to in terms of deepening my own reading, and not to be arrogant, but just to be real. Most people, like, I would never be a plumber. I could if I wanted to, right? I could learn that. It would take me a decade or two to become competent in that space. But that's just not where my speciality and my talent lies. And I'll leave that to others, and I'll call a plumber if I need a plumber. And in a similar way, I feel I can offer a service in the sense of being able to do things with people, for people that they themselves might not be able to do currently. And giving an insight into some of these kind of frameworks and philosophies is one of those things. And the other, I think, is just this recognition that there are many different ways to get to this experience. Like, one doesn't have to follow a particular lineage of cultivation to have this.
Can I give you a high five on that one, please?
Absolutely.
So agree.
And I mean, many of the traditional stories of the big kind of Buddhist realized masters are about people who spent 30 or 40 years studying shit. They knew all the scriptures, all of it, whatever was available to them at the time, mathematics, astrology, whatever. But very often they would be frustrated, and eventually they would be visited. And in the stories, they're often visited by a dakini, an enlightened female teacher who embodies these realizations and says to them, dude,
it's in you.
Barking up the wrong tree.
It's in you, babe.
It's in you.
It's in you. Let me show you.
Exactly. And it's the direct, realized, embodied experience of these things that actually switches these people. But then, very often, that's just the first step. They then go on to apprentice themselves to these teachers, or go off and wander in the wilderness and cultivate themselves more deeply in direct experience. So I think that's important. What you're doing, whether it comes from a traditional kind of scholarly background or not, it's the experience that you're facilitating, that experience of switching someone on to their own divine nature and showing them a broader perspective. And it comes from the authority of your own experience, your own embodied experience.
Absolutely, like feeling it. So that is my gift, is to guide people into the body and I always say, how much can you feel? Because that's the one thing that's the most difficult, is to learn how to really feel into the body. It's such a simple thing, but and to create a safe space where people can feel really deep into their bodies. So that's really what I am doing. And like a friend said, enlightenment is an embodied experience. But I do also believe what you're saying is that we use this web of support to get to this awakening. There's the physical, there's the mental, there's the guidance, there's the text. We can use all of these things to support us. And I truly value what you are teaching. And I can just say to everyone that whatever flow will be teaching you about the texts comes from a known experience. You've cast your net wide to see what gold really works. You've tried and tested everything. You feel it all in your body. It's the physical, it's the sexual, and it's also the spiritual, and you've got a very good balance of all of them. And you have a wonderful way of translating them in little bite-sized bits when they are needed. You don't just arrive, open your book and go, no. You really look at what's presenting and then see what texts can support this process. I value that in your teaching so much.
And you've just sparked another thing that I want to share. If we have time. I don't
know I'm sure we have time. Well, as long as the thing that records still.
So, and that's this thing of polarities. And that's very big in the Neo-Tantra space. Everyone's talking about the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and this is how they're supposed to be, etc. And as part of that, there is, and it's understandable, there is a kind of a knee-jerk reaction against any kind of rational or scholarly inquiry, where that's very often kind of poo-pooed. It's like, oh, this is just your masculine knowledge, and it doesn't really mean much. It's not really worthwhile. And so the counter then is to say, you just need to be fully in your body and follow your bliss, follow the impulses that's arising. And there's also truth to that. But what I find really valuable is this notion of non-duality, which is part of Tantric Tibetan Buddhism and also of the classical non-dual Shaiva Tantra, is this understanding that anything that we try and explain in terms of polarities, and where we gravitate towards one polarity over another, saying this is better than that, immediately is closing down our experience of the reality and also limiting us in our own personal development. And so this thing, what you were saying about experience and knowledge, for me is part of that. So I've always been curious, and I've been blessed with being able to read easily, and maybe that's because of my own neurodivergence. But usually it's been a process of bouncing back and forth between, okay, this is my experience. How do I make sense of the experience? And then looking out there for teachers, looking out there for teachings and books. And then the teachings and books, they help me to get a map and an understanding of what this is and how it works. And then I go back from that, back into the experience, and I have more clarity around how I can shape the experience. And the experience becomes more powerful and clearer.
Yes.
And I can direct it.
Wow. That's very useful, because someone like me will just be feeling this, and then I have to figure out, what do I do with this? And then you find a map to navigate within this experience, which is so visceral. It gives a map.
Exactly. Yeah. And that map is useful because, as you were saying, it's an embodied experience. And that's, again, one of the things of the classical Tantra, is that we see the entire body as a landscape with many different pilgrimage places, right? Yeah. So the sadhus in India would go on pilgrimage from one sacred site to the next. And essentially, when we're doing these inner yogas, we're also doing a pilgrimage into our own energy bodies. And so having a map of the territory that enables us to lead our awareness to different places in our own experience is very useful. We could happen onto these places by accident, like the first-time explorer does. But why do you want to be a first-time explorer when many, many others have already walked the path and have created roads and maps to show us which roads to take? And so for me, that's a lot of what these teachings really are. They're really maps to a terrain that is already pretty well mapped out and very well known. And that's linking to another thing that you were saying, is about bringing awareness into the body and leading your awareness through the body. And so one of the things, the gems that I took out of Taoist practices is understanding that energy follows attention.
Yes.
So wherever you place your attention in your body, your life force energy will gravitate towards that. And many of the traditional tantric practices actually entail leading your awareness to different parts of the body.
Yes.
Through the chakras, the nadis, and the three primary nadis, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, all of these different structures.
Yeah.
But it's not as if that's a territory that already exists in that form. It's more in the sense of we are building that. We're building that by leading our attention there and by life force energy following that attention and building those pathways in us.
Yes.
And so that's how we actually find our way to those different sacred sites within our own experience, our own embodied experience, by building a body, an energy body that's constructed out of life force. And that's why the disciplined and continuous practice is so important, particularly for people whose life force energy is awake. Because if it's awake and we're not able to guide the energy, it ping pongs all over the show and causes us to behave in ways that are often quite erratic, and that also cause a lot of confusion in us. And so again, one of the ways that Tibetan Buddhists speak about this is they compare those pulses of energy, they call it lung, which means wind. They compare it to a horse, a wild horse, and that your consciousness is riding on that horse.
Yes.
You need to learn how to ride and to direct the horse. Otherwise, it's going to buck you off, or it's going to gallop all across the landscape and lead you into some thicket amongst the thorns, or down a gully, or up the wrong road. So it's really about learning to work with that energy, not to control it and dominate it. It's not the Western approach to riding. I would say this is more the kind of Eastern approach to riding, where there's no bridle in the normal sense, with the thing in the mouth, and there's no spurs and stirrups. You actually have to have a good sense of again, harmony,
like that dragon in Avatar. Again, you plug into
that's it. You're blending
this thing that you're riding.
Yes, exactly. So it's not that kind of patriarchal dominating the energy, and I think that's also where I find I have issues with some of the what is commonly referred to as Kundalini yoga, because it's very authoritarian, very masculine, and very patriarchal, and trying to dominate this energy. What you said earlier rings so true. It's actually it's a surrender. It's also an act of reverence and of awe of this divine energy that creates everything that we can possibly experience as a manifestation of that. You're going to try and dominate that thing, it's going to kick your ass.
So, like, who are you to be this boss? Yes, but you want to intelligently move it through the body. I always say it's like a force moving through the ocean that's causing the waves. So you don't want the waves just crashing against the rock all the time. If you can find these gentle pathways, it can nourish and improve your connection to it, improve your sense of well-being in general, as well as your spiritual advancement by just moving it in certain, like, playful, almost like martial arts kind of patterns. It's very useful. It makes me want to now ask you, do you have any of these patterns available for people that are feeling this energy, that whose bodies are doing this, who are going into kriyas, who say, why do I, when I meditate, this happens, So there are people that actually need these maps and that are ready for them. Do you have an access point for them?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the most fundamental ones is this notion of the central channel. And many of the fundamental kind of tantric meditative practices really entail consolidating our energies into the central channel. And that's really creating a connection between the crown and the base. And imagining like a filament of light between the two. And then centering your attention in the heart. And then on each in-breath, you can imagine your awareness traveling down from the heart, down to the root, the base, and touching the heat, the creative life force, sexual energy that's there. And on the out-breath, you can allow that awareness to ride up the central channel all the way to the crown. And to just allow it to hover there in space above the crown for a heartbeat or two. And then on the in-breath, drawing that energy back down the central channel, past the heart, all the way to the root, holding it there for a moment or two, and then releasing it up again. And so that kind of pulsing between crown and root is an embodied.
Gets stronger and stronger as we go.
So that creates the primary pathway, the most important central channel.
I know, it's like God is here. God is in the house.
Absolutely.
Like, oh my word. Yeah, I perceive it as like a stream of light. I just feel a stream of light, and within, again, without, I do perceive it as a stream of light, but it's actually that light is like nothingness, like just clarity.
Yes.
It's not good or bad, light or dark. It's just energy, like energy. But I feel it connected to light.
That is, yes.
Totally connected to everything.
Well, the structure that we're creating with that kind of bipolar shape energetically is like a polar magnet. You've got the magnet in the center, but you've got the field energy which extends into infinity.
Yeah, and it can go either way. It doesn't have to only go this way or that way. You know, it's like...
And that's exactly right. So there you're touching on another important thing, which a lot of the kind of current esoteric thinking about Kundalini energy is all about raising the Kundalini up and out.
From where? Where to? Yeah, like one way.
Which is why we have such a lot of space cadets.
One trick pony, yes. Where are we going with this one? Yes.
Exactly. Lots of space cadets, ungrounded, unable to actually get their shit together.
Yeah.
So the movement of Shakti is also downwards, manifesting, creating, being in the real, being in the world. And so we need to be able to navigate both of those polarities up and down.
See, I sometimes struggle with this thing because I'm so in my feminine. Maybe I am very light with my energy. And maybe, you know, for me to find a stronger place in the world, and even like financially or whatever, without trying to manifest anything specific, but just to spend some time then, if you say this kind of energy will help me ground more on the worldly plane, to just in meditation, to often just move it down in my body just as an energetic calibration to help with various other things that I might be out of balance with.
So there's also something there from the Taoist side of things, where the upward movement is space and light and openness. Right? That's the sky energy, which is very spacious and open and undetermined. But the energy in the earth is very much the sap of the earth. It's life, it's growth, it's that. And so we can draw on both.
Yes. I find it a very forgiving energy, very like get real. It's a bit more raw. It's a bit more okay with seeing like, you know, it's like, it's more like rooted.
Totally, yeah. And so in the classical tantras also have this notion of the spacious sky energy being really Shiva consciousness, which is pure awareness, loving awareness that's ever present. It's unconditioned, it's always been there, always will be there. It's around. So on the out breath, also when we die, we merge with this energy in the sky. But the Shakti side of things is the manifestation first through sound and vibration down into all the different elements and the different sensory organs into the physicality of life and of being. So, and each breath is an opportunity actually to go through that process of full embodiment, total experience in the earthy, in the grounded nature of experience of life, and then to ride the breath out again up into dissolution, into the sky, into Shiva. And so we pause at each one of those. A couple of heartbeats at the crown with Shiva, and a couple of heartbeats down in the earth with Shakti.
Wow, that is so useful. I'm so going to do this. It's so good. It just feels like a good little energy calibration. It feels really, 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 really good. And I feel people can even try this. You know, sometimes I say this to my clients. I stroke them up and I go, just sense in your body which one you prefer. Do you prefer upstroking or downstroking? So just keep it simple. So I stroke them up.
Yes.
And I go, and I go, now I'm going to stroke down, obviously with gentle awareness. Stroke down. And it's completely different sense of being that runs through the body, a sense of how one feels, how one is in the world.
So I just also want to say, to acknowledge that this particular practice comes from a particular lineage, which is known as the Utah lineage, and it's a medical tantric lineage from Tibet. And this is kind of the first step but in itself, it also entails pretty much the sum total of all the teachings. But it also has its parallel in classical Hindu Tantra, where very often they'll only go down to the heart. I think, that particular lineage found everything under the belt to be a bit scary, threatening, and chaotic.
We'll just integrate half the body, okay?
Yes.
No.
But I think the point that I'm also making is to really be in the heart as well, because it's easy to either get fully into just desire and manifesting, or totally into the spaced out space without really being in the heart, which is essential. So, that was the one thing, just to acknowledge the lineage of that practice. The other is that usually it's also taught with mantra. And this is also an area where I find that Neo-Tantra is neglecting a really important aspect of like the traditional teachings, that mantra is essential to Tantra. In fact, Tantra, before it was called that, it was often called mantrayana, the vehicle of mantra. And mantra being not just a sound, it's more like spells. It's like we're invoking something. And in fact, belief is that mantra, in fact, are the sonic embodiment of divine consciousness.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Using
so
mantra
take the sound and the words and the shape that comes out the body as part of this connection with the divinity.
Yes.
Yes.
And it also has a quality of purifying the energy through mantra, through sound. So it's not just your own energy that's moving and carrying all of your stuff, but through the vibration that you're giving it through the mantra, there's a purification, and you're imbuing it with that kind of divine energy, divine consciousness. And so in like session work, you might find that manifests spontaneously with clients, that they might just voice things. And that's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. That yes. Totally. It does help. I find the voice is that final surrender. When you totally let go of holding anything back, that voice is like, then you're fully immersed in the full experience of being present.
Yes.
Yeah. And it also helps to, I find with myself, because I studied voice movement therapy, I'm qualified as a voice movement therapist. I know that my work in the voice movement therapy, with placing the sounds in the body, feeling the vibration in the body, feeling the emotions that come through it, being able to breathe this vibration like that really helped me to connect. I think that was a big part in me connecting with my Kundalini energy without me even knowing it. Just because it brings that focus into that it's an extra layer of presence.
And what you've just described is another core part of traditional Tantra, is that they will actually bring specific mantras to specific parts of the body and intone them in those places. So in a way, you're installing the divine in a particular part.
Yay. Yay.
And that's why it's also important to voice while you're lovemaking, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, it makes all the difference. I want to remind men to do it. Encourage men to. They tend to hold back a little bit because of the emotional aspect.
Yes. And getting very tense and constricted, and also not wanting to wake the neighbors or wake the baby or whatever it might be.
Sorry guys. Yeah.
The voice needs to be there, because that's also part of the liberating of the life force energy and allowing it to really blossom and flourish.
We can talk forever, because on that note, I find that in the sexuality field, when a couple's sex life starts diving is when they stop making noises. Now there's too many little children in the house and they stop making noises. Now their sex life is falling apart. It's like, dude, you need to weekends away in a remote cottage where you can howl at the moon and make as much noise as you can and just keep connecting to this life force.
Yeah. Which is probably also a reason why, that Tibetan lineage that I mentioned, they do periodic retreats for couples, where they encourage couples to take a week or even 2-3 days and go to a remote location. You have secrecy or intimacy or privacy, whatever you want to call it, and you can just be wild. Because I think that's another thing of our society, is that we have such an emphasis on correct behavior, correct way of speaking, being rational. So anything that feels irrational, crazy, animalistic.
More like children are on a daily basis.
Yes.
So we stop doing that.
That too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that spontaneous free play and exploration. And we don't allow ourselves that, because we're wanting to maintain a certain sense of decorum and dignity and rationality, and particularly again for men, I think, because in our culture, we are socialized to believe that women tend to be more flamboyant and expressive and wild and crazy and hysterical and all of those things, and men are always rational and clear and structured. Of course, that's bullshit. It's our patriarchal indoctrination. But because we've been indoctrinated in this way, it often is like that to a large extent. But women do feel they may be a little bit more easily able to connect to the wilder parts. And men feel threatened by that. They feel a need to be more disciplined, controlled, have a hold on things, screw the lid down tighter, and keep everything under control. So I think the voice is a great way of opening that up.
I feel it really counts for everyone, men and women. I mean, in my one online course, I have this module where we do voice, and I am always so surprised how many people, men and women, they say, "Oh my word, that piece with the voice really woke up something in me." And so I give a demo where I'm like on my hands and my knees and I'm growling like you know, and it's in the sexuality course. And people are like, "Oh, well, if she can do it, then I can do it." And when they start doing it, they're like, "Wow, that feels sexy, you know, it feels good." It's not always like so pretty, it's very liberating.
It's not pretty at all.
But it's lovely.
It's beautiful. It's delicious. And it's, you know, when I've been with lovers who are really free and wild and open, it feels, firstly, it gives me permission, and it also makes me feel like I'm being received, and also that this person's really enjoying themselves. So it gives feedback. But it shatters a lot of our kind of notions of like what is pretty and what should a woman look like.
Oh yeah, because now you're in a very strange position, having a seriously good time, and it's working.
And she's growling and roaring and having a really lovely time.
Yeah, I know. You think, "Oh my word! Like, how did I find myself in this position?" But let's play. You know, that playfulness is so. And we say wild. I think with the wildness is very much the just the wild abandon. Like one would be a wild animal, or bird, or fish, flower. Flower. And when it blooms, it's like
yes,
it's not maybe a little bit. It's like wow,
totally there, completely. But there's also an interesting thing there. And it's an apparent contradiction because, you know, I've been speaking a lot about this cultivation, right? And discipline, practice, and all of that. So I think there's this thing in our Western culture at the moment where there's kind of a pushback against that, of like not wanting to engage in discipline, not wanting to really cultivate deeply, and just going straight for the spontaneity and wildness. And I get it, right? And sometimes it's useful to have those moments cathartically. But what I'm thinking of in terms of that kind of wildness and spontaneity is more a kind of wildness and spontaneity that you'll see with an artist or a musician or a dancer who has honed their capacity and their sensitivity through countless hours of disciplined practice.
Yes.
And then when that inspiration hits, their movement and their expression is spontaneous and free. But they're drawing on all of that cultivation that came before.
They're actually holding it in an incredibly tight structure, which then actually creates all that liberation. But it's not ungrounded. And I so agree with you when we speak about wildness to always remember, and I think that comes with maturity. Like in the beginning, you might go a bit wild and you think, "Oh my word, was I in control there? Like who's holding the wildness?" And then we come to a point where we go, "Oh my word, you know, I don't just dive into wildness, and there's this beautiful, almost like a classical piece of music. There's all this intelligence, and it can build to like most wonderful crescendos, but it can also be held with delicate. There's a deep wisdom in holding wildness eloquently and elegantly. And I totally agree with you. Okay, this is so good. This is so good. Lovely. We can talk more, but shall we end off? Thank you so much. There's still so much to say. Thank you so much, Flo, for sharing your wisdom.
So lovely to have a good conversation.
Isn't it fantastic? Yeah. So in closing, I feel we want to just encourage those of you that are waking up, that are feeling the shakes, to know that you are not alone. People for yonkers, millenniums ago, have already experienced this, and it's grounded, and there is help out there, and we want to encourage you to connect with community, with teachers, and with the readings. And you can visit Flo's website, and we will put it in the link below. If you want to learn more about these specifically these maps we were talking about and the grounding and his knowledge, you're welcome to contact him directly via his website to ask questions or guidance. We do online sessions as well,
Yeah,
and in person.
yeah, of course.
And you have a wonderful library on your website where you point
all kinds of pirated materials.
Okay, yeah, because when you were talking a little while ago, I was like, oh, so you are the AI of. Now, I don't even want to call it one name. You're the AI of Tantra. You are the AI of Taoism. You are the AI of Shakti Energy. It's like you've got so much experience and knowledge, and you've got access to all these databases, and when it's needed, you can bring it forth.
The information is there. Anyone can find it, but I've kind of gathered some of it. So it feels like a bit of a dragon's hoard.
Dragon AI. Dragon AI. Yeah, love you so much.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank
Really
you so much
appreciate
for
the
the
conversation. Beautiful openness and spontaneity and a lovely connection to it.
Yeah. Thanks. Oh, so good.
Oh.
Okay.